Welcome to Fully Booked, the bookish podcast where I'll chat about all things book and reading related. Whether you're new or a pro reader, there's something for everyone to learn. I'm here to help you on your reading journey and find that next great read that will keep you fully booked. Hello readers, and welcome to episode 12 of Fully Booked. I'm your host Natalie, and today's episode will be my October reading wrap-up. A bit of a disclaimer, I did read a lot of books this month thanks to the readathon I did right at the start of the month. Since I read so many books, I won't be talking about the books I read during my readathon or that are on my autumn TBR from episode 6. If you want to hear more about those books, please click the link in the show notes to support the podcast, to listen to last week's B-roll, and get access to future episodes, where I will review my autumn TBR books once we get closer to the end of the season. Alright, with that out of the way, let's go on to the stats. So to start off, I read 12 books total and DNF'd 0 books, with a monthly average rating of 3.88 stars. I read a total of 4,048 pages. My average time to finish a book was 13 days, and I read 2 books on audio, which were Talking as Fast as I Can by Lauren Graham and Spare by Prince Harry. I will say, this month's stats are quite impressive overall with the amount of books I read and having no DNFs. It's funny because I was actually hoping to do a week of reading sprints originally during the last week of October, which I was able to read a lot on the Monday and Tuesday of the week. However, I got hit with some sort of stomach virus midweek and felt so sick that I couldn't do anything, let alone read. So that really threw my reading off, as I thought I'd be able to finish at least 1 to 2 more books before the month was over. Now, I mentioned these things to you guys to show you that while you may have grand plans, life is going to get in the way sometimes, and that's okay. And for me, especially when it comes to my health, I know it's more important to sit back and let my body rest and recover, which I'm glad to say I'm feeling much better now at the time of recording this part of the episode. And despite that setback, I was still able to have my biggest reading month yet this year, and the last read of this month got me to my yearly reading goal of 75 books. Like, what? And I'm eager to see how many books I end up reading this year now. Now, before we move on to the reviews, again, a reminder that some of these books will be talked about in different and or future episodes, so I will only be talking about 7 out of 12 books in today's episode. Now let's get into the books I read in October. So, for the first book I read in October, we have The Lost Ticket by Freya Sampson with a rating of 3.75 stars. When Libby Nichols arrives in London, brokenhearted and with her life in tatters, the first person she meets on the bus is elderly Frank. He tells her about the time in 1962 that he met a girl on the number 88 bus with beautiful red hair just like hers. They made plans for a date at the National Gallery Art Museum, but Frank lost the bus ticket with her number on it. For the past 60 years, he's ridden the same bus trying to find her, but with no luck. Libby is inspired to action, and with the help of an unlikely companion, she papers the bus route with posters advertising their search. Libby begins to open her guarded heart to new friendships and a budding romance as her tightly controlled world expands. But, with Frank's dementia progressing quickly, their chance of finding the girl on the 88 bus is slipping away. More than anything, Libby wants Frank to see his lost love one more time. But their quest also shows Libby just how important it is to embrace her own chance for happiness before it's too late. In a beautifully uplifting novel about how shared common experience among strangers can transform lives in the most marvelous ways. So, this book I picked up randomly as a palate cleanser during my readathon, and I also just wanted to try and get through more of my physical TBR. I'd heard some good things about this book from a couple of booktubers. I believe I originally heard about it in one of Destiny Sidwell's videos, and it's hard to find books with an honestly pure and good uplifting storyline nowadays, so I was eager to pick this up. The book definitely delivered on the uplifting part, and I love how this was a book where you come to love all the characters, and there's not really any characters you can truly hate or dislike. This story really showed all the good in humanity and how even the craziest of missions can bring groups of people together. It also tackled some harder topics like dementia, caring for a loved one, unexpected pregnancy, etc. Overall, I would say that the writing wasn't the best I've ever read, and parts of the plot were a bit predictable, like who the girl on the bus really is, as well as the very end of this book. But if you want a good pick-me-up after reading something scary or heavy, I think Freya Sampson is an excellent author, and I know she also wrote a book called Nosy Neighbors, which I kept seeing in the bookstores earlier this year and would love to pick up next. Alright, next up I read Talking as Fast as I Can by Lauren Graham with a rating of 3.5 stars. In Talking as Fast as I Can, Lauren Graham hits pause for a moment and looks back on her life, sharing laugh-out-loud stories about growing up, starting out as an actress, and years later, sitting in her trailer on the Parenthood set and asking herself, "Did you, make it?" She opens up about the challenges of being single in Hollywood. "Strangers were worried about me, that's how long I was single." The time she was asked to audition her butt for a role, and her experience being a judge on Project Runway. "It's like I had a fashion-induced blackout." In What Was It Like Part 1, Graham sits down for an epic Gilmore Girls marathon and reflects on being cast as the fast-talking Lorelai Gilmore. The essay What Was It Like Part 2 reveals how it felt to pick up the role again 9 years later and what doing so has meant to her. Some more things you will learn about Lauren. She once tried to go vegan just to bomb with Ellen DeGeneres. She's aware that meeting guys at award shows has its pitfalls. If you're meeting someone for the first time after 3 hours of hair, makeup, and styling, you've already set the bar too high. And she's a card-carrying REI shopper. My bungee cords now earn points. Wow, just gonna say, that is an interesting summary there of this book. But anyways, I had high hopes for this one as I love Gilmore Girls, and I was curious to get more insight into one of the main actresses of the show and Lauren Graham's overall life story. I did enjoy the first few chapters where she detailed her childhood, how she got into acting, and eventually landed the role of Lorelai Gilmore in Gilmore Girls. However, I lost interest as the, quote, essays went on, and let me just say, when she rambles every other minute, not sure if I would call that an essay anymore. That's just me, though. And in the end, I feel like I didn't learn that much about deeper details of her life story, like I usually do with memoirs. I learned some quirky random facts, but nothing that was super notable. Also, I listened to this on audio, and I'm not sure if that made me more or less lost, because I usually tend to get disoriented when speakers on audiobooks or podcasts ramble too much or stray away from the main point. And it's a bit of a shame, as I remember I saved her fictional book, Someday Maybe, at one point on my TBR, but I'm really not sure if I want to try reading it now or not. It is fiction, though, versus being another memoir, so someday, maybe I will. And maybe with that, I should stop with the play on words in these podcast episodes. Okay, moving on to The Hawthorne Legacy by Jennifer Lynn Barnes with a rating of 4.25 stars. The inheritance games ended with a bombshell, and now heiress Avery Grams has to pick up the pieces and find the man who might hold the answers to all of her questions, including why Tobias Hawthorne left his entire fortune to Avery, a virtual stranger, rather than to his own daughters or grandsons. Thanks to a DNA test, Avery knows that she's not a Hawthorne by blood, but clues pile up hinting at a deeper connection to the family than she had ever imagined. As the mystery grows and the plot thickens, Grayson and Jameson, the enigmatic and magnetic Hawthorne grandsons, continue to pull Avery in different directions. And there are threats lurking around every corner as adversaries emerge who will stop at nothing to see Avery out of the picture by any means necessary. Since the inheritance games ended, as the summary says, on a bombshell, I couldn't help myself and had to pick up the next book right away. And let me tell you, this book delivered once again on the mystery, and I actually found that there were more puzzles in this one compared to the first book, which I really like, as I enjoy trying to solve the puzzles, even though I usually can't. I enjoyed and was intrigued to learn more about the Hawthorne family and their past secrets and drama, but I admit I was a bit disappointed by the reveal at the end. Only because to me, it kind of felt like Avery's story could be over with this book, and I wasn't sure how much more could be continued in the third book. And also another note, I'm not super interested in the love triangle in this series storyline for some reason. However, I'm still a bit curious to find out more about some of the characters, as I feel like we've gotten some background on Jameson, Grayson, and both of their moms at this point, but I personally want to know a bit more about Xander. I just love his character's personality so much, and wish he was focused on more in this book, as he always feels like the lighthearted relief whenever he's mentioned, and we don't know much more than that. Now, usually I'd rate second books higher than the first one, but like I said before, this series started off so well, and I didn't feel that Hawthorne Legacy had any elements that necessarily went above and beyond the first book, which is why I ended up landing on the same rating. And it's crazy that I'm not even done this series yet as I record this, and I've already considered doing a reread since it's such a fun and bingeable series. Hey readers, I hope you're enjoying the episode so far, and hear me out before you hit skip. I'm so grateful for all my listeners who are with me on this reading journey, and I'd like to ask that if you haven't yet, please leave a rating and review as it helps others find the podcast. Also, please consider supporting the podcast financially as it helps me bring you more exciting content, and you'll get some extras like bonus and subscriber-only episodes, early access to new episodes, and much more. The link to donate will be in the show notes below, or you can go to buymeacoffee.com/fullybookedpod. Thank you so much again for choosing to listen to Fully Booked, and now back to the episode. Alright, next up I read The Cinnamon Bun Bookstore by Laurie Gilmore with a rating of 3 stars. When a secret message turns up hidden in a book in the Cinnamon Bun Bookstore, Hazel can't understand it. As more secret codes appear between the pages, she decides to follow the trail of clues. She just needs someone to help her out. Gorgeous and outgoing fisherman Noah is always up for an adventure, and a scavenger hunt sounds like a lot of fun. Even better than the cute bookseller he's been crushing on for months is the one who wants his help. Hazel didn't go looking for romance, but as the treasure hunt leads her and Noah and around Dream Harbor, their undeniable chemistry might be just as hot as the fresh out of the oven cinnamon buns the bookstore sells. What I will say first of all is that I didn't plan to continue this series this fall. However, I was able to find and listen to the audiobook on Everand, and from there decided it would be fun to try to continue this series, which actually worked out well because my new book club ended up picking The Christmas Tree Farm for our December book. And let me tell you guys, unlike the first book, this one was actually not that fall themed. The story actually starts and mostly takes place in the summer, and it was definitely more on the spicy side with the amount and way the scenes were described, so fair warning if you usually try to avoid spice. Honestly, there isn't much that I can say about this book, as the characters and story kind of reminded me of other romance books that I've read earlier this year, so I felt like it just didn't really stand out. It actually reminded me a bit of Practice Makes Perfect by Sarah Adams, except that in that one we got a bit more nuanced personality of the two mains compared to this book. Oh, and once again, the conflict in this book was hinged on a huge miscommunication and then resolved super quickly, ending in an HEA, which kind of drove me crazy because it was something that the MMC could have easily just cleared up, but just didn't out of fear. For overall vibes for the season, I do enjoy these books, I will say, but The Christmas Tree Farm might be my last read of Laurie Gilmore's, as some of the things she does in her plot lines and with her writing are, I don't know, they're a bit too bothersome for me personally that I just don't know if I can continue reading this series. Alright, next up I read The Boyfriend by Frida McFadden with a rating of 3.5 stars. Sydney Shaw, like every single woman in New York, has terrible luck with dating. She's seen it in men who lie in their dating profile, men who stick her with a dinner bill, and worst of all, men who can't shut up about their mothers. But finally she hits the jackpot. Her new boyfriend is utterly perfect. He's charming, handsome, and works as a doctor at a local hospital. Sydney is swept off her feet. Then the brutal murder of a young woman, the latest in a string of deaths across the coast, confounds police. The primary suspect? A mystery man who dates his victims before he kills them. Sydney should feel safe. After all, she is dating the guy of her dreams. But she can't shake her own suspicions that the perfect man may not be as perfect as he seems. Because someone is watching her every move, and if she doesn't get to the truth, she'll be the killer's next victim. While I was obsessed with Frida McFadden last year, I think around the same time of year actually, it's been a while since I've picked up one of her books, and I kept hearing about this one specifically in many recent BookTube videos. That and I felt like I was starting to head towards a book slump around this time of the month, and needed to pick up something more plot-heavy with a lot of action, which this book delivered. However, I realized that I've read enough thrillers by now to know what makes and breaks one, like pacing, plot and character development, narrator voice and style, etc. And I would say overall, her books are starting to get a bit predictable for me. This book did surprise me near the end still, but some of the events and character reveals like throughout the story, I was able to pretty much guess on my own. I definitely still find her writing style easy to read and addictive enough that you want to keep turning the page, but I might be getting to the point where I don't feel the need to read every backlist book of hers. From what I've heard, she does have different premises / setups in each of her books, which I do like, so I am interested in checking out a couple of her other titles. But otherwise, there are somewhat or even much better thrillers out there that I really want to get to first in my TBR, and perhaps Frida might be more of a fallback author for me for at least certain periods of reading, which, FYI, just want to say there's also nothing wrong with having. Alright, next up on the list we have Spare by Prince Harry with a rating of 3.25 stars. It was one of the most searing images of the 20th century. Two young boys, two princes, walking behind their mother's coffin as the world watched in sorrow and horror. As Princess Diana was laid to rest, billions wondered what Prince William and Prince Harry must be thinking and feeling, and how their lives would play out from that point on. For Harry, this is that story at last. Before losing his mother, 12-year-old Prince Harry was known as the carefree one, the happy-go-lucky spare to the more serious heir. Grief changed everything. He struggled at school, struggled with anger, with loneliness, and, because he blamed the press for his mother's death, he struggled to accept life in the spotlight. At 21, he joined the British Army. The discipline gave him structure, and 2 combat tours made him a hero at home. But he soon felt more lost than ever, suffering from post-traumatic stress and prone to crippling panic attacks. Above all, he couldn't find true love. Then he met Meghan. The world was swept away by the couple's cinematic romance and rejoiced in their fairy tale wedding. But from the beginning, Harry and Meghan were preyed upon by the press, subjected to waves of abuse, racism, and lies. Watching his wife suffer, their safety and mental health at risk, Harry saw no other way to prevent the tragedy of history repeating itself but to flee his mother country. Over the centuries, leaving the royal family was an act few had dared. The last to try, in fact, had been his mother. For the first time, Prince Harry tells his own story, chronicling his journey with raw, unflinching honesty. A landmark publication, Spare's full of insight, revelation, self-examination, and hard-won wisdom about the eternal power of love over grief. Before I get into my thoughts and review this book, I just want to put a disclaimer that my rating doesn't reflect what I think of the memoir / the actual person's life and events that happened, because who am I to talk negatively about someone's life story and to rate it, so to speak? Rather, I'm commenting on certain writing style, tone, or amount of information they did or didn't include that might not have suited my reading taste. And if I'm being honest, writing style usually determines 80 to 90% of my ratings for books. So it's something that's very important to me when reading. Okay, now with that, first of all, I want to say I did enjoy hearing about the earlier years of his life, growing up as a child, family dynamics, going to school, and what life was like overall growing up as the so-called spare. I can see how being the, quote, spare did shape quite a bit of Harry's identity even in his adulthood, and how damaging it also was at times. I also found it fascinating to hear about the shattering effects of his mother's death, and some interesting truth to what really happened the day of her death, which I'm obviously not going to reveal here in case anyone wants to pick up this book. But yeah, just know that there was some interesting stuff that was written in this memoir. And of course, I can't deny, I did really love the last part of the book that talked about meeting Meghan and their love story. But the middle part of the book really felt flat for me in terms of the storytelling and just dragging out certain parts. Not that hearing about his time in the army was totally boring, albeit a bit, but I felt like a lot of the stories he was retelling in the middle felt very repetitive. And I'm going to be honest, I personally felt his ghostwriter, because yes, he did use one for this book, could have done a better job describing the settings, as I found reading some of these descriptions too simple and boring. And especially, I would tune out at times since I listened to this all on audio. I think some stories could have been cut out and only the most important kept, as some stories felt, as I said, the same after a while. And I found myself getting a bit confused at the timelines, and really all of them were just driving the same narratives home to the reader, which could have been made condensed if they just cut some stuff out. I also was surprised how little the departure from the royal family was addressed, as that was my initial impression of what this book was really about. But overall, this was still a good and interesting memoir to read, and I think those who are more fascinated with the royal family will especially enjoy Spare. I just happen to not be one of those people who has a royal family obsession. And last but not least, we have The Final Gambit by Jennifer Lynn Barnes with a rating of 4.5 stars. To inherit billions, all Avery Kylie Grahams has to do is survive a few more weeks living in Hawthorne House. The paparazzi are dogging her every step. Financial pressures are building. Danger is a fact of life. And the only thing getting Avery through it all is the Hawthorne brothers. Her life is intertwined with theirs. She knows their secrets and they know her. But as the clock ticks down to the moment when Avery will become the richest teenager on the planet, trouble arrives in the form of a visitor who needs her help and whose presence in Hawthorne House could change everything. It soon becomes clear that there's one last puzzle to solve, and Avery and the Hawthorne brothers are drawn into a dangerous game against an unknown and powerful player. Now, I know I just said that I wasn't sure how much more there was to tell in my review of the Hawthorne Legacy literally earlier in this episode, but I can safely say that Miss Jennifer Lynn Barnes took me on quite a ride and satisfying conclusion to the series. There are still lots more family secrets unraveled, as well as puzzles in this book, and I feel like we got a bit more closure for some of the characters, especially for our beloved Hawthorne boys. I think the only thing that disappointed me a bit was the resolution of the brothers' love triangle, as I felt like it got faded into the background with everything else going on near the end, and we don't really see Avery make a real choice. And if you read Mockingjay in the Hunger Games series, you'll know what I mean by this. It's that same kind of ending in terms of the love triangle, in my opinion. I did like that the ending was kept open to continue new stories in this world, and I definitely enjoyed this series so much that I want to read at least the first few books of the sequel/accompanying series. And I'm so glad that this book was my 75th book of the year, as it really was a good one to finish in terms of the series itself and for reaching my Goodreads goal. And that wraps up my October reading wrap-up. Hope you enjoyed hearing about the various cozy, spooky, and other books in between that I read this month. If you want to hear about the rest of the books I read this month not mentioned in this episode, don't forget to click the link in my show notes to support the podcast to get access to all related and future bonus episodes. And with that, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you back here for episode 13. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope you were able to take away something, and be sure to follow the podcast for more bookish content. Until next time, stay fully booked, and I'll talk to you soon.